Hi everyone, thanks once again for joining me on the Financial Management for Small Business session. This is session number 4 and my name's Sarah Reimann, and today we're going to be talking about choosing the right business trading entity for your business. And this topic today is one that should probably be thought about at the beginning of your business journey, but we can also change as our business grows. And I'll share that with you today. And I'm really looking forward to this one, and I trust that you'll get immense value from what goes on in this series too. This is just a disclaimer. The information provided is general in nature only and does not constitute personal, financial, or taxation or business advice. So, there's many things to consider when we're starting a business or even growing or scaling up or an existing one. Which entity do we trade in? What registrations, legal requirements are there? How do we go about this? Sole trader, partnership, company, or trust. And in this session, we're going to go through the pros and cons of each of these and how you can how you can decide which one is right for you. So before we get into the 4 different entities you can trade in as a business owner, I just want to address the government departments I'll be referring to in this session, in case you're sort of like not familiar with the terms and the basis of how they operate when it comes to trading as a business. So number 1, the Australian Taxation Office, or the ATO as they are fondly referred to, is the collector of many taxes in Australia. I say many, not all, because there are approximately 125 taxes in operation in Australia, and the ATO is only the collector of very few of these. Departments like state revenue officers collect things like stamp duty, payroll taxes, and fuel taxes. And just for your information, in session 6 of this series, I'll be going through in more detail the government and ATO tax compliance regulations as they apply to business, so take a look at that session later on. The Australian Securities and Investment Commission, or ASIC as they are known, and they are the company and the financial services regulator in Australia, and they enforce laws to protect consumers, investors and creditors. And this is where a company or a business trading name is registered also. So throughout this session, when I refer to these 2 bodies, I'll be referring to them as the ATO or ASIC, just for your reference. So there's many things that we need to do and think of when it comes to starting, running and building a business. And whether we are just starting out or in a period of growth and expansion in our business, we need to be aware of the laws and the regulations which govern how we trade and the tax and legal implications of those choices. So as I just mentioned, there are 4 main entities that we're going to be talking about today, and these are relevant to 98% of businesses in Australia. And that is the percentage of small businesses that are currently registered or operating in this country. The bigger businesses can choose different, more complex structures as they have more liability and they probably have a larger pool of assets to protect, but that's outside the scope of this presentation today. So each of these entities has virtually the same obligations when it comes to government compliance, which I will cover off as I said in session 6. But their legal requirements are different, which is what I will be outlining today. So first up, sole trader. Most people who start off in business choose this type of entity in the beginning. This is the easiest to understand, it's the cheapest and can virtually be set up on your own without having to engage a lawyer or accountant to do it for you. However, as I've mentioned many times, as you may know in this training course, please get professional business advice if you're really not aware of the government regulation around business registrations and trading. A sole trader is an individual running a business. You are the owner and you control and manage the business. You are legally responsible for all aspects of the business. Debts and losses cannot be shared with other individuals. You can employ workers in your business, but you can't employ yourself. You can use your own individual tax file number for your income tax returns, and you report all of your income and expenses there too. There's no separate business tax return for sole traders. So how do you apply to become a sole trader? So as you can see on the screen, I've got a screenshot here of the Australian Government Business Register, just as an example. So you apply for an Australian business number or an ABN through the Australian Business Register on abr.gov.au, as you can just see. And just let me say that all entities I'll talk about today have to have an ABN to become a registered business in Australia. So this applies to all of these entities. There's an extensive questionnaire regarding your business dealing, your details, and the activities that you're going to be undertaking and the industry you will operate in order for them to approve your ABN. And during this application, you'll also be able to register for GST and PAYG withholding taxes. GST is mandatory for all businesses who turn over a total sales of greater than $75,000. And PAYG withholding for employee taxes if you're going to employ workers. And again, I'll go through that in more detail in session 6. So if you want to register a business name as well, which as a sole trader you must do if you want to trade as anything other than your legal personal name. And this again also applies to the other 3 entities. Then ASIC Connect is where you do this. So at connectonline.asic.gov.au. And you can also search within this site as to whether your intended business name is registered already, because we can't go and register something that's already taken. And it would be advisable to do this as well before you go registering like a domain name or a logo or getting a website done. So you must already have an ABN registered. So this is the second step. So in whatever entity that you choose, then you'll be able to have that entity own the business name, and that applies to all of the others as well. So we need to get our ABN first, then we can decide what business name we want. So if John Smith wants to start up a carpentry business, he can only trade as John Smith unless he goes and registers a name, for example, John Smith's Carpentry, for example. The second entity we're going to touch on today is a partnership. So essentially the same rules apply to a partnership as they do to a sole trader, except that there are 2 or more people involved. And so it is a group or an association of people who carry on business together and distribute income or losses between themselves. And they share control of the business. And a partnership must have a separate tax file number to the individuals. It must also lodge a separate annual tax return, and it must show all of the income and deductions of that business. And the partnership does not pay tax on the profits in its own right. Rather, it is distributed and shared amongst the partners, and they declare their share of the income in their own personal tax returns. And they pay tax personally on the profits that are made. A partnership must again apply for an ABN and register for GST, just as same as all the other entities under the same rules. And a business name must also be registered through ASIC if the partnership wants to trade in any other name than it's legally registered, which is usually, for example, the first and last names of the partners in the partnership. A written partnership agreement is not essential for a business partnership to exist. It's a very good idea though. This should outline how income and losses will be shared. As you can see on the screen, this is a small example of a partnership agreement, a legal agreement. And so this should outline any of the income and losses that will be shared amongst the partners and how the business will be controlled. And this sort of thing can prevent misunderstandings and disputes about what certain individuals are entitled to receive from the income of the business. Partners in a partnership are not employees of the partnership and they can't take a PAYG wage from it, but they can employ workers and they may withdraw monies from the business by way of owners' drawings, not wages. Setting up a trust. So a partnership is very similar to a sole trader, except again, there's two or more people and the liability falls, all the liabilities fall to the partners. There's no kind of asset protection. So the third entity I want to talk about today is a trust. Setting up a trust can be expensive as a formal deed is required outlining how the trust will operate, and there are formal yearly administration tasks for the trustee. A trust is like an artificially created legal entity, which is similar to a partnership, but a trust can hold investments and trade as a business. It must have a trustee in place, and that trustee is usually either one or more individuals or it's a company. Profits from the trust go to beneficiaries, but the trust does not pay tax in its own right. I just want to let you know that the only two entities in Australia that pay taxes are individual people, so humans, or companies. A trust can be a complex but very useful structure to use for business. And done correctly, it can be used to share income amongst family members to legally reduce and spread the liability of income taxes. So if you use a trust for your business structure, the trust must, number one, have its own tax file number for lodging its own annual tax return. It must apply for an ABN, as all entities do. It must be registered for GST if its turnover is going to be more than 75,000, and it must pay super for any of its employees. And this may include the business owners if they are also employed by the trust. So they can be employed by the trust as opposed to a sole trader or partnership where they cannot. So who pays the income tax in a trust? So if you make a profit in your business in a trust, the trust deed, as we said before, determines how the profits are going to be distributed. So in a trust, we have beneficiaries, and when we set up a trust, we nominate who they are. So for example, the beneficiaries of your trust would probably be your spouse in normal circumstances, and it could be other family members such as mum, dad, sister, or brothers. Beneficiaries like of a normal discretionary family trust normally can't be people outside of the close family unit. So if all trust income is distributed to adult beneficiaries, so people over the age of 18, the trust is not liable to pay tax. If we start giving distribution of profits to minors, so children under 18, then we start to pay 48.5% on those taxes. So it's not beneficial to be doing that. But each beneficiary reports the income in their own tax return. So similar to a partnership, but the income does not need to be split evenly. So if the trust makes a $100,000 profit and there's two beneficiaries, they could get $80,000 one person and $20,000 the other. They could get $50,000 one person and $50,000 the other. So a trust should always be set up with a company as a trustee rather than individuals. And the reason that is because it then limits the liability of that trust. So if someone comes to try and sue you as a business person for negligence, they can only get to the assets that are in the trust, which is owned by the trustee, which is a company which probably would only own things like a car. They cannot get to your personal assets. So this makes this type of entity the most expensive to set up, but can be the most beneficial in terms of income splitting and tax reduction strategies. Having a company rather than individual trustee ensures the asset protection and keeps the entity separate to the owners, which we'll talk through now in a minute when I talk about trading as a company. But again, as I've said throughout this course, please get professional help and advice on this. It's not advisable to set up this sort of entity on your own if you are not well versed in how it works. Please go and see your accountant or your lawyer and get them to set this up for you. Because if you get this wrong, you will pay more to fix it up later. So getting on to a company now. A company is a legal entity with higher setup and administration costs, and companies also have additional reporting requirements. A company is run by its directors and it's owned by its shareholders. And while a company provides some asset protection, as I said before, people can't get to your own personal house, its directors can become legally liable for their actions and in some cases the debts of the company. So again, someone sues you for business negligence, they can only sue the money and the assets in the company for damages, not your personal home or assets. The only instances this would apply is if there was fraud or criminal activities involved, and then the court has full discretion on anything. Companies are regulated by the Australian Securities Investment Commission, so ASIC, as we mentioned before, and an annual fee or a charge of around $300 is charged to keep the company registered with ASIC. This type of business structure, again, must apply for a tax file number, its own company tax file number. It must apply for an ABN, an Australian business number, and it must register for GST if the turnover is going to be more than $75,000. It owns the money that the business earns. So the individuals who control the business cannot take money out of the business except as a formal distribution of profits. And they do this as a business owner or a director of a company. You do this by two ways. A dividend is issued to you, or you take wages with a PAYG withholding. Just like you are an employee of someone else, you can be an employee of your work, of a company. What attracts the wages as well is superannuation at 9.5% and also work cover or state-based workers' compensation and insurance. A company must lodge an annual company tax return. It usually pays its income tax by instalments. So, as I mentioned before, there's only two entities that pay taxes in Australia, a person or a company. So a company can pay taxes. Currently, the company tax rate is about 26.5%. Over the next few years, it's going to be going down to 25%. And in a previous session, I do talk in more detail on the company and individual tax rates. So it can actually pay company instalments as it goes on a quarterly basis, and it pays tax at the company rate, which is lower than individual rates. And again, it must also pay superannuation contributions for itself or for eligible directors. So the company must register through ASIC. This is just an example here of an application for registration as an Australian company and a company register. So if you have a company or a trust, it must have what we call a constitution, which outlines who the shareholders are, who the directors are, how many shares are owned. It must have a register, whether there's an old black book there. It must have that in either a PDF or digital format. And it must do this again through the connect.asic, connect online through ASIC. But again, this is not an entity that I would recommend setting up yourself. Companies and trusts are fairly complex structures, and there needs to be a lot of considerations in them when we're first setting it up as to who's going to be involved in them and what sort of profits are going to be available there. So which entity is right for you? Whether you're just starting out or whether you've been a sole trader in a business for a while, it's important to think about protecting yourself and your business. And we do this through choosing the right entity for the right stage of business that you're at. So If you're just starting out in business, or you've only a couple of years in, and your income and profits are fairly low, then a sole trader is, again, the easiest thing to set up. It is the most easiest thing to understand for most people, and that would be the way to go, and that's the most low cost. Partnership is only if you want to get another person involved, or it could be a spousal situation where partners go into business together, or it could be even friends. Two friends might go into business and buy a cafe, for example, and then you would set that up in the beginning. As your business grows, you need to grow and expand with it. And you can, if you do start out as a sole trader or a partnership, you actually can change to a trust or a company later on. I've helped many business owners do that when I was an accountant. And the reason that you might do that is, again, just for more flexibility in splitting income. The only drawback of that is that you do have to get a new ABN and a new tax file number for that new entity or that new structure. And these days a company could be one of the best alternatives to trade in business, because the company rates of tax are now coming down to be much lower than individuals. And there's plenty of asset protection. You can have your own home in your own name and not worry about losing it because through business dealings. So again, if you're unsure what structure is right for you, please seek advice. As I said many times over this course, please look for professional help, as it will save you a lot of time and money. And it's definitely worth the time and financial investment in getting these things right in the first place, that's for sure. So your accountant, your lawyer, or your trusted business advisor, please go and get help on these things. Reach out to me if you need any recommendations or any help. But thanks again for tuning in to the 4th installment of this series, and we'll see you in the next one.